I'm Zyra Calloway, and on the morning we buried my sister, my own family told me to stop asking questions and let things go. They said it the same way they always said everything to me, like I was a problem, not a person. But when my sister's boss found me outside the church and whispered, "Zyra, she left something for you," I felt the ground shift. For the first time in years, I realized the truth I'd spent my whole life trying not to see in my family. Silence wasn't love. Silence was a warning. And Alora, she must have known I was the only one who would finally break it. I returned to the edge of Puget Sound, under a sky so heavy with mist, it felt like the air itself was grieving. By the time I reached the church, the cold had already settled into my bones. Dew clung to the wooden benches outside, turning them slick and pale, and the smell of wet pine drifted up from the walkway as if the forest were breathing against my neck. Inside, my parents sat frozen in their own private storms. My father hadn't spoken a single word since I arrived, and the hollowness in his eyes made me wonder if he was holding himself upright by sheer will. My mother's hands trembled so violently the tissue she gripped had become nothing but wet shreds. But Corbin and Lissa, they were something else entirely. They kept their distance from the casket like it might stain them. Every few minutes, they exchanged those quick, sharp glances people use when they're not checking on each other's feelings, but checking their stories. And while everyone else stared at the floor, or their hands, or the flowers wilting under the cold, Lissa angled herself toward the car window, smoothing her hair and straightening her coat as if she were late for a luncheon instead of a burial. Something in the room shifted for me then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet crack under the surface, the kind that precedes every accident scene I've ever walked into. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I felt it in the center of my chest. When the service ended, Corbin lingered near the tree line. For a moment he watched me, half hidden by the branches, wearing an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not sorrow, not shock, worry. And as I stepped off the church steps, that feeling followed me like a tightening thread. I wasn't just attending a funeral. I had stepped into something I didn't understand, but whatever it wasn't grief alone. As I stepped off the church's wooden stairs, still feeling the weight of my family's strained silence, a man's voice rose from the mist. He stood beside a gray pickup near the edge of the lot, half shadowed by the branches above him. The moment I recognized him, something in my stomach tightened. It was Jonas Alder. He looked out of place in the cold morning, dressed sharply but unable to keep the small tremor out of his posture. The way he held his hands at his sides reminded me of someone steadying himself before delivering bad news. His eyes swept across the parking lot in quick, clipped movements, checking corners the way someone does only when they're afraid of being watched. He told me we needed to talk somewhere private, and then lowered his voice to ask that I not mention our conversation to my family. The request alone pulled a line of tension through my spine. People don't seek secrecy at a funeral unless the truth behind the loss is still alive. His office overlooked the gray stretch of the Sound, the windows fogged from the damp air outside. Inside, the wood-paneled walls held the kind of stillness that made every breath feel too loud. Jonas opened a safe built into the wall and pulled out a folder like it was the heaviest thing he owned. He said Alora had brought it to him in confidence and instructed him to give it to me if anything ever happened to her. Inside were structural plans marked with altered load ratings, internal company emails missing from their servers, and purchase records that didn't align with the materials listed. There were also several printed memos with edits in handwriting I recognized instantly. Elora's. Jonas explained she had begun fearing someone connected to my own family, someone who had a stake in burying a structural flaw at a coastal project before it reached the wrong eyes. I stared at the evidence and felt my pulse shift. Whatever I had walked into today, it wasn't just grief. She had left these pieces because she knew she might not survive long enough to finish what she started. I stayed in that office long after Jonas stepped away, the stack of documents stretching across the desk like a map of a disaster that never had the chance to happen. Every page pulled me deeper into the world Alora had been navigating alone. She had flagged discrepancies in the material orders, highlighted internal approvals that didn't match the original designs, and annotated her suspicions with a precision born from fear. Not paranoia, She had written one quiet line in the margin that felt like it reached across the grave to me. Zyra will understand. By the time I walked out, the fog outside had thickened, and a black SUV sat parked at the far end of the lot. Its plate was unfamiliar. When I glanced toward it, the engine hummed to life, pulling away with a slow, deliberate ease that didn't feel casual at all. Back at my parents' home, Corbin and Lissa watched me return with a strange alertness, their eyes too sharp, too assessing. Lissa asked if I had spoken to anyone after the service. There was a tremor in her voice, but it didn't belong to grief. Upstairs, while going through Elora's last box of belongings, I felt something stiff beneath the lining of her winter coat. I slid my hand in and pulled out a microSD card, so small and carefully hidden it made my breath hitch. She had sewn it into the seam. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. There was no chance I would open it inside that house with their eyes on me. I grabbed my keys and drove until the coastal lights faded behind me, stopping at a small motel near the marina. Only then, behind a locked door, did I let myself look at the tiny card resting in my palm. I didn't know what it held, but I knew it would change everything. The morning after the motel, Puget Sound hung under a lid of gray so heavy it made the house look like it was sinking into the fog. I stepped inside expecting a quiet kitchen, maybe my parents whispering to each other the way grieving people do. But instead I found Corbin and Lissa waiting in the living room like sentinels. They both turned toward me in the same breath, as if they'd rehearsed it. Lissa didn't bother with polite concern. She asked where I'd spent the night. Her tone too direct, too prepared. Only one person knew I'd left after the funeral, and it wasn't either of them. A cold realization slid through me. Someone had been tracking my movements, and it wasn't a stranger. Corbin's gaze dropped to the coat draped over my arm. He commented that it wasn't the one I'd worn the night before, saying it in a way that lodged itself under my skin. The only way he could know something that specific was if he'd seen me when no one should have. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. He shouldn't have been anywhere near where I had stayed. I went upstairs, trying to steady myself, but the moment I entered Elora's room, I saw faint smudges on the locked drawer she guarded more fiercely than anything she owned. My parents wouldn't have touched it. That left only the two people standing downstairs, acting like they were entitled to answers. When I asked if anyone had gone through her things, Corbin shot a look at Lissa before claiming they had only been cleaning. I asked why cleaning now involved tampering with locked drawers. He dropped his eyes and turned away, the way guilty people do when they can't think fast enough to lie. Then came the question that cut deeper than any of the others. Lissa asked if I'd found anything unusual among Elora's belongings. Not meaningful, not sentimental, unusual. The word tightened every muscle in my body. She wasn't curious. She was fishing. I told her no, but my pulse kept pounding in my ears even after I walked out the door. That night, back at the motel, I loaded the microSD card into my laptop. The video flickered open with the angle from a hidden camera. Positioned high in the corner of Elora's office, fluorescent light buzzed faintly in the background. A figure stepped into view. It was Corbin. He moved with casual confidence, like someone performing a routine he had practiced. He inserted a USB drive, replaced the original file with a falsified one, and walked out without hesitation. The proof was undeniable. Elora hadn't been paranoid. She had been targeted. I pressed my back against the motel wall, feeling the thin wood tremble with every breath I took. My family's world had cracked, and the truth spilling through the fractures was far darker than grief. One of them had sabotaged her. One of them might have pushed her toward the edge she never came back from. I opened the folder linked to the video, and a compressed file expanded into a collection of documents Elora had clearly kept hidden. The first was an audio recording. Her voice sounded strained, barely above a whisper, as if she were trying to speak without being heard. Then another voice cut in, sharp and cold, warning her to stay silent about an incident. I replayed it until I couldn't deny what I already knew. It was Lissa. The next document was a login trace showing someone accessing Elora's computer at 3:16 a.m., 2 days before she died. The IP address led straight to Corbin's house. The weight of that realization settled like a stone in my chest. He had known exactly what she was uncovering. Then I opened the file she'd titled Redline Truth. She had mapped out the structural defect, the alterations made to hide it, and her fear that a collapse could take out an entire row of homes. This wasn't negligence. It was a calculated risk with catastrophic potential, and someone had decided that silencing her was easier than fixing the truth. At the bottom of an unsent email, she had written that if I was reading it, she no longer had the ability to defend herself. I blinked through the blur of tears, forcing myself to read the last line, "Evidence will speak when no one else can." She had known she was being cornered. She had trusted me to see what others refused to. My phone lit up beside me. A message from Corbin appeared. "We need to meet. Today." He knew. He was watching. And there was no turning back. I went back through every log file on the micro SD card, tracing Alora's steps the way someone tracks an echo in the dark. The more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was stepping into footprints she left knowing they might be her last. When I opened an unfinished email draft, a system alert flashed across my screen. Attempted access from unknown device failed. I froze. Someone had tried to log into her account at the exact moment I did. It wasn't Jonas. It wasn't any agency. And it sure wasn't my parents. Someone was tracking her digital trail the same way they were tracking me. Before I could recover from that, Jonas called. I could hear the panic edging into his voice as he told me someone had returned to his office, and this time had taken exactly what they came for. I drove over, and the moment I walked inside, the cold crawled up my spine. The drawer that once held Alora's documents was completely empty. The backup drive had been ripped from the server rack with precision, not panic. Even the safe had been cracked open the way professionals do it, clean, controlled, and without hesitation. This wasn't the work of someone improvising. Whoever wanted the evidence gone wasn't working alone. Someone bigger than Corbin was steering the wheel. As I stepped outside, fog drifted across the lot, and through it rolled the same black SUV I'd spotted near my parents' house. The antenna, the slow, deliberate glide of the engine, it was unmistakable. They weren't following Jonas. They weren't following the office. They were following me. I got back to the motel with the weight of everything pressing against my ribs. I opened the last folder Alora had hidden deep in the directory. Inside was a call history tied to her work phone, listing repeated calls from a number that appeared 3 times the night she disappeared. I plugged it into my phone, and when the owner's name popped up, the room went cold around me. It belonged to Lissa. I kept scrolling through the metadata until I found a file named Depth Log. It looked corrupted at first, until I adjusted the brightness. Then a single line of text revealed itself. LL connected with CS. Further payment to be arranged. LL. Lissa Lane. And CS wasn't just a name. It belonged to a major subcontractor bidding on the same coastal project my sister oversaw. Lissa had been coordinating with someone far above Corbin. She wasn't just complicit, she was facilitating a cover-up. The truth had grown bigger than family betrayal. I was standing in the middle of a conspiracy. I returned to my parents' house earlier than they would be back, hoping for a moment to breathe. But the second I pulled into the driveway, any chance of that vanished. Corbin and Lissa were standing at the front door, their silhouettes framed by the gray light like shadows waiting for a cue. They weren't knocking. They were staring through the living room window, checking if I was inside. I stepped out of the car and felt the air tighten. Lissa turned first, her smile thin and strained. She said we needed to talk about what I had found. I hadn't told anyone I'd uncovered anything. The fact that she spoke like she already knew made every hair on my arms rise. Oops. Corbin followed with something far worse. He said all of this would have stayed quiet if Alora had just gone along with what she was told. That single sentence cut the ground out from beneath me. He had pressured her, pushed her, and he knew he had said too much by the time he saw my reaction. Then Lissa asked if my sister had left behind anything else. Her voice trembled with the wrong kind of fear, not the fear of loss, the fear of exposure. She knew about the hidden evidence. She was terrified I had it. When I refused to answer, Corbin stepped into the hallway like he owned the house and started toward Alora's bedroom. He said he needed to check something. I moved to block him. His expression tightened, his voice dropping into a warning that didn't try to hide what it was. He wasn't covering anything up anymore. He was threatening me. My phone was recording in my coat pocket, and I let it. Lissa, always the first to break under pressure, finally cracked. She said they didn't want me ending up the way Alora did. She said my sister had pushed too far, and that was why it all happened. She didn't realize it, but she had said everything. Alora had been threatened. She had been cornered. She had been silenced. And as soon as the words left her mouth, I knew exactly what I had to do next. It was time to bring in the FSB because I wasn't dealing with grief anymore. I was dealing with a crime. I left my parents' house the moment their words turned into threats, driving straight through the dark to the FSB office in Tacoma. Rowan listened to the recording with a stillness that felt heavier than any reaction. When she finally looked up, she said they needed me to help finish what Alora had started. By nightfall, a tiny microphone was tucked beneath my collar, and a camera was hidden inside my coat button. Agents waited in unmarked cars around a nearly empty marina lot, while I stood under a harsh street lamp, gripping my phone just to keep my hands from shaking. Corbin's truck appeared first, headlights slicing across the asphalt. He stepped out tense, eyes darting, insisting I stop before things got worse. His voice wasn't warning, it was control slipping from his fingers. Then Lissa cracked, blurting out a reference to CS, confirming everything Alora feared about the network behind them. I raised my voice so the mic would catch it, saying the project could kill people. The words sent panic spiraling. Corbin grabbed my arm, shouting that Alora didn't know how to stay silent, then froze when he realized he'd said it on record. A faint red blink from Rowan's car signaled the takedown. Blue lights exploded across the lot as agents swarmed in. Corbin and Lissa were pulled apart, handcuffed, their world collapsing as fast as the lies they built. And for the first time since Alora died, the truth finally fought back. A few weeks later, I walked into the federal courthouse in Seattle with the heavy, unspoken truth of what Alora endured pressing against my ribs. The courtroom lights were harsh, the walls unforgiving. When the screen powered on, the footage from the micro SD card filled the room, Corbin entering her office, inserting his USB drive, swapping the real files for the falsified ones with calculated ease. A quiet ripple moved through the gallery as his intentions became undeniable. The FSB agents followed with their findings. They presented the login originating from his home in the early hours before her death, the threatening emails she'd tried to hide, the edited documents traced back to his computer, and the fraudulent payment trail tying him and Lissa to the subcontractor network. It wasn't just a mistake. It had been a coordinated effort to silence her. Then the recording from the marina played. Hearing Lissa say my sister had brought it on herself turned the courtroom into a vacuum of stunned silence. Behind me, my parents broke down not because they were learning something new about Alora, but because the truth tore away the last illusions they had about the people they thought they knew. The verdicts came swiftly. Corbin was convicted of fraud, intimidation, and evidence tampering. Lissa of collusion and endangering public safety. The CS network was formally pulled into a broader investigation. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Rowan told me I had honored what Alora couldn't finish. For the first time, justice finally felt real. I drove to the rocky overlook where Alora used to sit with her sketchbook, the wind pushing hard against the cliffs as if trying to wipe the world clean. The tide below crashed in long, steady breaths, and the fading light stretched across the water in soft gold, painting the place exactly the way she always did. It felt, for a moment, as if she could still be sitting there, legs crossed, pencil in hand, seeing something the rest of us missed. I unfolded her final sketch and set it on the warm stone. The lines were delicate but sure, full of the quiet certainty she never lost. Even when fear closed in, it wasn't the work of someone defeated. It was the work of someone hoping truth would eventually find its way to the surface. I whispered that I saw it now, every piece she tried to leave behind. I didn't cry. The ocean did, its waves breaking hard against the rock, as if carrying the last of her voice back into the world. And when the sun finally slipped behind the ridge, I understood that I had brought her home not in body, but in truth. This ending was never about revenge. It was about giving her the justice she deserved. 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 justice she deserved, justice she